Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening today. I am going to be talking to Kathleen, and we're going to be hearing about her FI story. I'm really excited to get to know her a little bit. Hey, Kathleen, how you doing? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, nice to meet you a few minutes ago and to introduce myself to the audience. My name is Kathleen. I am a lawyer in DC at a big law firm, what they call like a white shoe law firm or a big law, a very old school. And I've been there for nearly 20 years. So coming close to the end of that journey. But yeah, DC lawyer, couple kids, couple dogs. I hope you don't hear the dogs in the background. They don't pay attention to my instructions, but the kids generally do.
That's great. I'm selfishly hoping I do hear your dogs because I love dogs. So great. Okay. So you are a lawyer at a big law firm. I'm assuming that we can't go into too many details about that because probably you can't really tell us which law firm it is or what kind of lawyer you are. I don't know. I want to make sure that I'm respecting your privacy, but I am curious what made you want to go into law? I mean, 20 years, that's a long time to be dedicated to something.
It's a decision I made when I was 12 years old and just executed on it. Sometimes you could say without thinking, is this really the path I want to be on? But to take back one step, I am a litigator, meaning the lawyers who are involved in lawsuits. What a lot of folks don't know is that there's a whole massive variety of lawyers, many of whom will never enter a courtroom. And my type of law, we are litigators. We fight out suits at the trial level. And I do what's called product liability work or mass tort work. So I represent large companies when large groups of people sue them over their products. And it's mostly in the pharmaceutical space, in the food space, in other areas too. So it's interesting work. How did I get into this? My mom's side of the family, there were a lot of lawyers, and I remember hearing that. And I also remember hearing, you are a strong-willed and persuasive young woman, and you'd be a great lawyer. And so the young 12-year-old Kathleen was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. Along the way, I thought, okay, I'm going to get a law degree, but I'm probably going to go into government service, public policy. And the JD, people say, it teaches you how to think. So I was like, okay, I'll go to law school. And I went to law school and was planning to do public service. And then you do these summer internships after your first year and your second year of law school. And first year of law school, I went to the SEC. Second year, I was going to do something. I was looking for government related stuff. And I thought at the very last minute, let me just throw my hat in the ring on some of these big law firms just as a backup. It's easier to get a summer position at some big law firm coming from the school I was at than it is to get some of the government stuff, is like the DOJ honors program or something. So I thought, let me give it a shot. And I went and liked it and then went back after graduation. And that was 2007 and now it's 2025. 18 years later, it stuck. I did not anticipate practicing law in private practice. I did not anticipate practicing law at all. I thought I'd be a government servant. But here we are, and it's turned out to be interesting. It's intellectually challenging work. It's very time demanding work. That's a challenge, and that's part of how we started thinking about FI and FIRE is because of the time commitment. But overall, there's no place I'd rather practice law. And I don't think that there's a better path that I should have taken. There's no sort of what would have been question. It's turned out really well. And I work with amazingly smart people who are also good people. And it keeps you on your toes intellectually.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And I'm glad that it worked out because it sounds like you wanted to go one direction and then pivoted and went the other direction. And I'm going to ask a really dumb question, but my dad is a lawyer. I have people in my family who are also in the medical field. And one thing that they always rail against is TV shows that try to represent their fields. And so I was just going to ask you because I think that one lawyer show got really popular recently.
Is it Suits?
Suits, yeah. And I was like, so how accurate is Suits?
I can't watch it because these things get everything so wrong, and the legal procedurals are just so ridiculous that anytime they come on, I end up yelling at the screen and saying, like, that was an improper objection. The judge should have done this, they should have done that. And my family's like, just stop. We'll watch something else. The only lawyer show I could watch was Better Call Saul because Jimmy McGill is just an amoral delight, but a delight. So that one was fun, but I still yelled at the TV about that fairly frequently.
Yeah, that's so funny. I make the joke sometimes. I'm like, if they ever made a TV show about product management, which they never would because it's boring as heck, but if they ever did, I'd probably yell at the TV show too. Awesome. Cool. I'm curious what drew you to law itself? Were your parents in it? Was there somebody who you knew who was in it? Why did you want to be a lawyer? And why did you want to be in government? Even though that didn't work out, like why were you drawn to that specifically?
I was a government and economics major in college and did a lot of public policy type stuff. I wrote my thesis on the effects of women's economic circumstances on their voting decisions and did some quantitative work there. And I just thought the policy stuff sounded really interesting. So I thought I would somehow be a policy maker because I loved econ and loved government policy. I also went to school in New Hampshire starting in 1999. And if folks are thinking back historically, New Hampshire has the earliest presidential primary, and 1999 was coming into 2000, which was the Bush Gore election cycle. And the campus was just electric because the candidates would come to campus over and over and over. And so at that point, it was Bush, McCain, Gore, Bradley. And that, as a young person, just got me so excited about the political stuff. It's funny because the college kids get really involved in the campaigns and you end up meeting the candidates a lot. I had a friend who on primary night was driving the Bradley campaign van and he literally crashed it into a snowbank. And he was like, I knew at that point that's what was happening to Bradley's campaign. But it was an exciting place to be politically. And so that made me think I want to do policy development. This sort of 12-year-old self had said law school. And I was, oh, actually, law school is a good way to get into that because the government has a ton of people who have JDs, but who are not practicing law. The phrase that you hear a lot is a JD teaches you how to think. It's sort of rigorous analysis and it's very portable into other areas. I was like, okay, that law school plan probably makes sense. I thought briefly about getting a PhD in economics, decided not to go that way, and just went the law way. Again, thinking I was going to do policy, thinking I would never practice a day in my life. And I actually was terrified about the idea of litigation because being on your feet in front of people in a very live way, in a courtroom, in front of a judge, a jury sometimes, or even in a deposition where you're across the table from opposing counsel and you can say a limited amount of stuff sometimes, but you're really battling it out. It's very oppositional. You technically have an adversary. And for someone who's conflict avoidant, which is me, the idea of having an adversary was terrifying. But it turned out that the substance of the work was interesting enough, like the actual stuff you learn to help represent the client was interesting enough that stuck with it. You basically end up with having portable skill set that you apply to each new set of cases. And so we learn new things about the clients, their products, the science behind them for every case. And that part, that's fun.
Yeah, that does sound fun. Do you ever regret not being able to go into the policy maker field?
No, because I could have jumped ship at any point. And frankly, I had thought, okay, I'm going to the firm, and law school is not cheap. And it was in New York City, which is also not cheap. So I was living on loans. I thought, I'll do this for 3 years, pay off the loans, and then go into policy work. But then I saw the amount of work and stress that folks in that space had and their salaries and the amount of work and stress I had in my salary and just kind of doing the mental balancing math and also know yourself. I'm going to be stressed no matter what the work is because there's a personal pressure to do well and to not want to disappoint people. So if you're going to be stressed no matter what, and one lifestyle is going to afford you comfort and being able to pay for kids and get your home paid off, and the other one is going to be sort of constant financial stress. I was like, I'm going to stick with what I've got.
Yeah. Why add on to the stress that you were already going to have?
Exactly. I mean, we all know that the financial stress is a terrible thing. So, yeah, why add that to life if it doesn't have to be there?
Yeah, for sure. Did you pay off the loans in 3 years?
Yes.
Wow. Nice. Where'd you go in New York? Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah. I went to Columbia. So, way uptown in Morningside Heights.
Yep. I was at City College
Oh, great.
for my master's. Yeah, so a little bit further north than Columbia, actually. It was Harlem, I think, which was right above Morningside Heights.
Harlem starts at 125th. Are you guys in the 130s? Was that?
Yeah, so City College was around the 140, 135.
Yeah, we were in very close to the same neighborhood. Yeah.
That's so cool. And City College is part of the CUNY, like City University of New York. And it's like Hunter is part of that. When did you live there?
04 to '07. How about you?
I was after you. I was 10 to 17.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot older than you. So,
You do not look older than me at all. I know you guys can't see her, but you look
oh,
great.
you're very kind.
Awesome. Okay. So I want to go a little bit further back. And you said that you majored in government and economics, right? Yep. So why did you want to major in that? What was your journey to that major, I guess? Let's talk about that.
I just thought it sounded fun. I'd always kind of thought that the game of politics sounded fun. And as a young person who didn't know anything, I thought, well, maybe someday I'd run for office of some sort because the work that they do sounds interesting and the game sounds fun. Very quickly decided that would make the quality of life go down dramatically. Having a public presence, being in the public eye, that would be terrible. But just policy and how these decisions can have massive effects on people and their well-being always kind of sounded interesting. So that's why in college I sort of dipped my toe into the government stuff and I thought, "Oh, it's interesting to learn the history of these big programs that we have and how they came to be and what effects they've had on people." And then on the econ side, it was, oh, you can actually learn about the math behind all these theories of why to make this policy or that policy. And it captured my intellectual attention, you could say. And I liked that you could do sort of a more rigorous quantitative look at these things if you develop the quant skills. And it felt fun. I also did a summer internship in DC the summer after my freshman year, worked half the summer in the House and half the summer in the Senate. And DC itself felt very energetic and it just felt like a wonderful place to be as a young person. So the sort of topical stuff seemed interesting and the geographical place seemed interesting. And so you put those together and it was a natural desire as a 19-year-old to say, like, this is what I'm going to do. And then as you go along, I realized the policy route will make no money and will be very stressful. The law route will make some money and be very stressful. So let's go with one over the other. But it was kind of a energy of the city plus intellectual spark on the type of work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love DC. I've only been there 2 or 3 times, but the museums are beautiful and I'm actually really weird. I really like the weather. I like how cold it gets there. I like cold weather.
You say cold. That's right, because you're a southerner, right?
Sort of. I have lived most of my life in the South, I guess you could say, but I prefer cold weather. Most Southerners like it hot. My sister, who's lives in Austin and has been there for 25 years, I asked her if she ever wanted to move to North Carolina to be closer, and she was like, "No, it's too cold there." It's like it is not cold. It's almost October and it's 89 degrees outside. That's not
That's
cold.
why I was like chuckling as you said cold because, like you said, it's almost October and I think 84 is our temperature today. But in the winter, we definitely get colder than the Carolinas. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you actually get snow, which is what I'm jealous of. Yeah. And then of course the museums.
They're wonderful. And the fact that the Smithsonian system is free, it's so nice because you can just wander along the mall and bop into one and out and into another. And so, yeah, and they're beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally worth it if anybody hasn't been to DC. To the museum mall is what they call it. It's not a shopping mall. Okay. So you made this decision to go into government and economics. It sounds like around the year of when you were 18. And it's so funny how when you're 18 and what you think you're going to enjoy doing as a career really does change so much. And I'm glad that you found out quickly that a pivot was needed, unlike me, who the pivot came after trying really hard to do what I thought I wanted to do and then being completely disillusioned to the whole thing and then changing careers at 30. So I don't regret it. I will say I don't regret it. I got a lot of really awesome experiences out of it. Living in New York City and being an art historian in New York was pretty great, but it is funny how that pivot has to happen because when you're 18, you really shouldn't be tasked with choosing what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So I find that interesting.
How cool that you were willing to do that, to go into such a niche field, to give it a shot. You're going to have stories to tell from that for the rest of your life. And 30, at first, it feels, oh, that's late. But in the whole course of things, it's so young. I didn't start my career till I was 27, and I went almost straight through because, you just have a lot of schools. You got a first career that's in such a different field from what you're in now. And you got a taste of how a whole different field operates, and you have stories to tell from it. So I think it's great. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I love that perspective. And yeah, I love it when I tell people, oh, yeah, I'm in tech now, but I used to be an art historian. And everybody's like, wow, an art historian? Because I don't think people have ever really met art historians in their life. And I will say, I was the lowest totem pole art historian. I wasn't a curator at a museum, which the equivalent of a curator is think like a director level. I was never that. I was a peon at a museum, but it was still a lot of fun. Cool. Okay. So I would love to pivot to your money, or I like to call them origin stories because it's just fun. And I wanted to talk about what one of your earliest money memories is.
Yeah, there are two. I will say from a very early age, I was very interested in money and earning it and understanding it and not saving it so much at first, but I was fascinated by money. And I remember this is in the mid 80s. My mom had this blue notebook, and I think she still has it almost 40 years later, the exact same notebook. I saw it last week at her house. And she had this blue notebook that had a page for every month of the year, and that was her budget. And so there was a little 2-column budget, handwritten, and it was in sort of a rough order of priority, starting on the left hand column. I could barely read, but I remember asking her, Mom, what is this? And she explained it. And she said, Dad makes so much money per month, because at that point she was a stay at home mom. And we have to decide how to spend it. And we want to make sure that we're covering everything that we need to and all of our priorities and having some money for fun. So we do this thing called a budget. And I remember the first line of it was tithe. My dad was a minister. There are megachurch pastors in Texas who make a lot of money, but ministers of 100-person congregations in Ohio do not make a lot of money. And so money was always tight, but my parents, as their first line, always gave 10% of their income. And that stuck with me forever. Second thing was mortgage, and that was the biggest thing. And then all those food and utilities. But I remember learning about this and thinking, that's really cool. You can have a plan for your money and you figure out what you have to cover and what you want to cover. And I remember also around the same time getting an allowance. Now, my parents were very irregular with an allowance because they didn't remember, and I didn't remember to ask, and I also didn't want to press them because I knew money was often tight. But this is the 80s, and I got $2 a week. In the 80s, also, the Disney movies existed, but the Disney mega store of buying Disney princess attire did not exist. So I remember watching the old Disney movies and I wanted the Disney princess dress, but you couldn't buy such a thing. They just didn't exist in a retail level. So I saved my $2 a week and bought some pink fabric from the fabric store and asked an old lady in our church if she could make me a Disney princess dress. So that was the first time of saving up money to buy something and having a little goal. Now, of course, I got her pink cotton fabric and no crinoline or anything like that. So what I got back was a skirt. And I was devastated that somehow she could not do the magic and make this into a silk Disney princess dress because I was 6 years old. But having that little goal and saving the $2 a week for it, that's one of my earliest money memories. I would also sometimes use that money on Hostess cupcakes, but we eventually got to the fabric purchase. That took a little while.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cute too. And I'm so sorry for your little 6-year-old self who was, man, I wanted this beautiful princess dress and I didn't get it. That makes me sad. But yeah, I know what you mean. The mega corporation that is Disney today is very different in the 80s. I wasn't a kid in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, kid in the 90s, but it was similar. That's when Disney started really ramping up their movies and stuff. And I only went to Disney World, I think the one in Florida, once when I was a kid on Halloween, and that was it. We didn't do every year going to Disney. I think some families do now. It's a whole thing, even on ChooseFI. They could talk about here's how you can go to Disney really cheap every single year. And I was like, why would you want to go to Disney every year?
I'm with you. It sounds like one would get boring, and two, I listen to ChooseFI. I always skip the Disney episodes of anything because it's a racket at this point. I don't know if you've ever looked into tickets. Like people are spending a lot of money they don't have to go to Disney. You get there and it's still incredibly crowded, and there are multiple layers of fast pass, extra fast pass, blah blah blah. And I think it's a shame because you can't just go and have a relaxing time because you're trying to get the most for your money and it's really expensive. And yeah, I'm with you. Although people who love it, go for it. Godspeed.
Oh, yeah, do your thing. I'm just saying the Disney of the 80s and the 90s was way better.
Yes.
That's all we're saying. Our generation had a better childhood. No, I'm just kidding. Great. And I love that your parents also were willing to talk to you about this notebook. And I don't know how old you were, but you said you could barely read, so pretty young. So it's pretty cool that they were open to saying, hey, this is money and this is what you do with money, instead of saying, oh, we don't talk about this. So I really like that. And it sounds like your mom even told you how much your dad made, which is very unique because my boomer mom has yet to ever tell me how much she made, even though we talk about money all the time. She will not tell me her salary, which I think is funny. So, yeah, I love that. How else did your parents talk about money when you were growing up? I want to know how they talk to each other, how they talk to you, if you have siblings, how they talk to them, and what the atmosphere around money in your household was. Like, was it tense? Was it pretty relaxed? Was it nonchalant? I would love to know that as well.
I knew money was tight, but I never heard them fight about money. My dad passed away a few years back. He and I, before he passed away, would talk about this, and my mom and I do too. And they didn't really fight about money because a couple things. My mom was an audiologist. She could have kept working, and that would have frankly made the family finances a lot more comfortable. But they made the decision together that until we were solidly in school, she wanted to be home. I have a sister who's 2 years younger. She also wanted to help my dad with the church because in these little churches, there's no assistant, and she would run the women's groups and stuff like that. So I knew money was tight. Part of that was because they were on the same page about a decision that they made, and they were very transparent about this, which I am so grateful for because it meant that money was not a mystery. It was not something with shame. It was something that did sometimes have some stress, but you work through the stress and you talk about it. My mom had grown up in an old school Irish Catholic family. She was one of 8 kids, so there were 10 people in the house, and her dad was fairly high up at a corporation. But when you're feeding 10 mouths, that's going to stress the budget. And so she had grown up aware of money. Her mother had come from a lot of money. So she had seen sort of a wealthy mother coming into a life where she had to economize more. And my mom had a pretty healthy attitude towards money. There's certainly some fear elements, but overall pretty healthy attitude. My dad had come from a family of 2 siblings, and his father was a pilot. He had been a pilot in World War II, actually had his plane go down over the Himalayas. It was a whole great adventure. But then he was a corporate pilot for a big corporation. And so my dad being one of 2 with his dad as a corporate pilot, they weren't rolling in money, but it was comfortable. And I think his parents had a really healthy attitude of, if you want to make a big purchase and you've thought about it and you've saved up for it, we will meet you halfway. So my dad was really into audio stuff. He built his own sound system. He told them how much it was going to cost and he saved half of it, and they met him halfway because they knew, okay, this is a good thing for a kid to be interested in. They helped him buy a used car. And so he had come from a family where earning and saving was a very important thing. All of my grandparents had come through the Depression. They were born in the teens, and so they were young people in the late 20s and the 30s, and so they'd all been very good savers. That had been imparted to my parents. My parents didn't have the Depression era death grip on money. They were thoughtful about it. They were conscientious about it, but it wasn't a point of huge anxiety. It was just a point of awareness. And you need to be thoughtful because it does not grow on trees. And I thought it ended up being a good balance because we always had everything we needed, There was no question as to security of the needs, but we had some wants. But the wants were something you had to work for. And I think that ended up being a good balance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I like how you told the story of your grandfather and helping them pay for your father's purchases half half. Because I see that a lot in my story. My mom would help me, not for every purchase, but for some bigger ones that I couldn't do on my own. She would help me. So, my first car, that wasn't a hand me down beater that my parents had stored somewhere. And they were like, this still runs. You can drive it. I did have one of those. That was my first car. Oldsmobile Silhouette from 1990 with maroon bucket seats.
Nice.
Yeah. And so when I wanted my own car, my mom was like, well, I'll meet you dollar for dollar because there was no way I'd be able to afford one. And I think the Silhouette also had died by then. So I definitely needed a car. And I was about to go to college and I was going to commute back and forth. And yeah, we got me a 2001 Dodge Neon and it was orange and I loved it. And it was my favorite car because I paid for it, just not fully, but I paid for it and it was wonderful. And then an ex boyfriend several years later totaled it, but whatever.
Well, two things. One, I think it's so cool that your mom did that. I've listened to a good number of your podcast episodes and heard you talk about your money experiences with your mom. I think it's really awesome that she did that. And two, I remember when the neons came out in the 90s and I so wanted a neon. I think I wanted like a purple neon. So you got orange. We were both into funky colored cars, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely do love funky colored cars. It's funny when I moved from New York to North Carolina. In New York, obviously, in the city, you do not need a car. It's dumb to have a car unless you want to pay $800 a month for parking. And yes, seriously, $800 a month for parking. And that was in 2016. So who knows what it is now. But it's not a funky color car, but I definitely was like, I want a red Prius. That's what I want. It's either got to be red or it's got to be orange. And Priuses didn't come in orange. So I got a red one. And now if I ever got a different car, it'd be a RAV4. And so what's the funkiest RAV4 color that I could get? So I don't know. I like fun colors in cars.
There's a Jeep down the street that has a custom rainbow stripe job. So
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Side tangent. Our friend Paul, who we of course make fun of him for this, has one of those Tesla truck things that are just the ugliest thing you've ever seen. And then he also got a wrap on it because actually the outside of them is very prone to damage from weather. Which I think is funny. So he had to get it wrapped and he got it wrapped in this bright teal blue. And so I'm like, so you are the only one who has a bright teal blue Cybertruck. And he's like, I am. And he's not the kind of guy that you would think would drive something like that. He's super low key, soft spoken. He was in the finance world, so he made a lot of money. Around 50 years old, is outdoorsy. And I'm like, why did you get this thing? And he just was, I like new technology. So
we'll never lose in the parking lot.
yeah, exactly. When I see him park, that thing is so big. I'm like, how does that even fit? We have to make new streets for how big this thing is. Okay, let's go back to your story. So I love that your mom was like, you know what? I'm going to be a stay at home mom for a little while and help out in a church, even though I was an audiologist. And I get that actually, because part of the conversations Chris and I have been having a little bit about me becoming a mother is, okay, is there any point in time where maybe I wouldn't want the kids to go to daycare? And not because of cost, because it really doesn't, I make a lot of money, so it doesn't really matter for cost, but it's more like, would it be better for me mentally to stay home with them until they're in school and then go back to a career after that? So I totally get that. I think a lot of women have that kind of mindset. And I was wondering, because I know you said you had kids, did you ever have that idea, or were you always, nope, definitely going back to work? Or did you have any of that, ooh, this is really hard being away from my child?
It was hard being away from the kids, for sure, but I never really entertained the idea of not going back. In part, that was a part of our lives. Life was very expensive. And my husband has always made very good money, but I've always been the higher earner. It's the nature of being in Big Law. So I didn't want to put the stress on him of being in a high cost of living area. I don't think we're a very high cost. We're a high cost of living area. I had been the larger earner. I also was worried that if I stepped away, I wouldn't be able to get back in for my field in particular. I think there are a lot of other fields where you can step away for a while and more easily step back in. And for people who are in those fields, I think that's amazing because you really do have more flexibility to take 1, 2, 5 years out, have those formative critical years at home with the little ones, and then step back in. In my mind, it wasn't even an option. And I think there might have been some psychological barrier I was putting up. I'm like, you can't consider it an option because if you do, then you're going to want to do it. So it wasn't even an option. I did not want to go back to work. That was in part because of I didn't want to be away from my kids, but it was also in part because I didn't want to get stressed back. This is back in the day when we had Blackberries because my kids are teens. And I remember putting away that Blackberry the night before giving birth and being like, I'm not going to see you for 4 months. And I did it. Other people would check their email while I'm parental leave. I did not do that. You've heard of Sunday Scaries. Think of Sunday Scaries when you've been out for 4 months coming back. I was petrified to come back to work. But I bit the bullet, and day one back, I kept the same schedule as I'd had before having a baby, and I was just, okay, we're just going to do this. So I left the office at 7 o'clock the first day I got back and got home at 8, and the baby was asleep, and I bawled my eyes out. Yeah, it's hard. If you've got little ones in daycare and you're working full time, it is hard.
Yeah, I don't know how my mom did it because she was a single parent. And she tells me this story. So I have a lot of siblings, but the ones that are just hers, because my dad was married a lot. And so I have halves and stuff like that. But the ones that are just hers, so I was the oldest, and then I have a younger brother, and he was born in 1989. And 2 weeks after he was born, she had to go back to work. I asked her, I was like, so did you put him in daycare? And she was like, yeah, daycares take newborns. And I was like, so did he have formula? Like, what happened? Yeah. And I was like, that's the 80s for you. I complained a little bit about my husband's paternity leave, I think 7 weeks. He works for an international company, and they actually have their parental leave policy for the whole company. And then they have one that's separate for the US. And it's only 7 weeks for the men. I think whomever is having the child, they get a certain amount of time, and then the partner gets a lower set of time. And so it's only 7 weeks. And I just was, oh man, that sucks. You just reacted. But then when I told my mom that, she was like, well, I was a single parent and I had to go back to work after 2 weeks. Well, she wasn't a single parent by then, but after my brother was 6 months old, she was a single parent once he turned 6 months. So she had it hard. She had it rough. So I say that not to say that we don't deserve to have very good paid parental leave for both parents. I do feel lucky that I don't have to go through that.
Here's the thing, we hear on social media and from friends a lot of complaints that we don't have the same policies as Europe. And that's true, we don't. But I do think if you look at the trajectory over time of what it was for your mom in the 80s versus now, I mean, even the marker of when I had my kids 15 years ago, things have gotten better. Your mom was 2 weeks. I can't even imagine fathoming going back to work 2 weeks. Your hormones are a wreck. Your baby is not sleeping for more than 2 hours at a time. That is just absolutely horrific. I got 18 weeks of leave, which was great. But my husband, he was the government contractor at that point. I think he got two. And so he actually went back to work. I think it was 3 days after I got out of the hospital because he wanted to save the second week of leave for when I went back to work. So we could have one more bridge week before the baby had to go into daycare. So he got two. And because you might have a same sex couple where one was primary, one secondary. I think the firm gave secondary parents, which was mostly fathers, 4 weeks at that point. And now, 15 years later, fathers get 18 weeks as well. You can take a 12-month leave from your job. No, but they are trending better. My hope for our country is that they keep trending better and better. So we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, me too. That's a really positive way to look at it. I do like that. Yeah, my company gives 12 weeks full pay, which is nice. I was like, that's pretty good for a company that's likes to call itself a startup. Yeah, it's startup culture, but it's not technically a startup. So anyway, circling back, all of this is leading to me to probably your reasons for finding the five movement. But before I get to that part, I do want to know how you think that your childhood and the way that your parents dealt with money and talked about money and taught you about money, how that shaped your philosophies as an adult with money.
Well, I knew that I did not want to live like a flashy, spendy life. I thought I was going to go into public policy work. I never assumed I would actually have any substantial amount of money. So I always assumed that I would need to be very good with it. Because they were so open with money and because I was so interested in understanding it and making my own, I started working as early as possible. And so from a very early age, I loved the feeling of the autonomy of making money. And so very early on, that shaped the desire to make money and knowing that it takes hard work and it takes perseverance to make money. I had a paper route when I was 10. I under the table illegally started working in a movie theater when I was 13, and then in 14 it was legal. I spent one summer working half days at the pool at the concession stand and then evenings at a restaurant. And the end of those 14, 16-hour days, you'll put your legs up against the wall because they're like throbbing because you've been on them all day. So I loved making money from very early on because I saw from them what money can do and the comforts it can bring, but I never assumed there would be much of it. And so I always assumed I'd have to be careful with it. I think that shaped my thinking going into life. My parents had always been very generous, and I had long known that living your life with a closed fist is just not it's not a happy way to live. They were always giving to other people, even when they didn't have a lot. So I wanted to be able to do that as well. So those things kind of shaped my thinking about money and also thinking there's not going to be much of it. So I'm going to have to be responsible with it. And you're going to have to work hard for it. So along the way, college, law school, I did get myself into some debt. I think that's the story that a lot of kids have. The internship I mentioned summer after freshman year, those were unpaid. And I had to get a little grant from school to pay my rent, but that was about it. I was going to Safeway and charging my groceries on a credit card. And there was no way I was going to ask my parents for money because I knew they didn't have it. And I knew my dad had actually taken on some extra work to help pay for my schooling because I went to a very expensive school and got financial aid, but it didn't cover everything. So I was not about to ask my parents for money. So I did start to go into credit card debt. And I knew from their teachings and I knew from just sort of knowing basic ideas of compounding, that was a scary path to start down. And that probably in the background also shaped my thinking when I started towards private practice rather than public because I wanted to make sure I had security. I think that the desire for security was an overarching kind of philosophy, and that security I didn't think was going to come from making gobs of money. I thought it was going to come from steadily at a decent job and being thoughtful and being responsible. And then I just happened into a field where it was much more plentiful than I had ever anticipated.
Yeah, that's rough. I have done my fair share of unpaid internships, and I think they finally put a law in place where they're like, yeah, nah, you guys can't do that anymore. But I don't know if that's true for all internships. The interesting thing about the ones that I did for my art history major, both undergrad and grad school, is not only did you not get paid, but then you had to pay the school for the credit that was associated with that internship because you were required in your master's program to have internships. You had to have two, and they were credits that you paid for like a regular class. So not only was I not being paid, I was paying for the internship.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's such a racket. Now, it was not a full time or anything. It was still part time, which was good, but yeah, it made it very hard. I also lived off loans. I think you mentioned that earlier that you were living off loans in New York City. I did the same thing. And yeah, there was actually a point where the loans weren't enough. And I think my grandmother would give me money here and there because my mom refused. She didn't think me getting a master's degree in art history was going to be very lucrative. So she was like, I'm not paying for anything. And I was like, okay. And so my grandmother had to help me out a little bit. It was only a couple $1,000s here and there. So it wasn't that much money, but It was disheartening. And I wasn't working the first year of my master's program. And so I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to just add a job to all this. I know I'm already stressed, but I have got to have a job. I have to pay for something. So I started doing student stuff and then trying to find a real job after that and writing my dissertation and all of that stuff. So
Calm, relaxing period of life, right? No stress, no stress. But that's really sweet of your grandma because you said it was only a few $1,000s here and there. But when you are looking at your bank account and it says -$10, those few $1,000s here and there, that makes all the difference in the world. So that's so sweet of her.
yeah, it was really sweet of her. And I felt really lucky because I didn't know what I was going to do. I probably could have put it on credit cards too, but I already had credit card debt because I was also dumb and spending it on clothes and drinking. I was not a smart 23, 24-year-old when it came to money.
As someone who spent her early mid 20s in Manhattan, I understand. Often didn't have classes on Friday, so Thursday, it's the end of the week. Decompress, okay, take the train down to Filene's basement or to Loman's and go get another going out top. And so I would spend an hour in their clearance racks. It was a clearance rack and it was at a discount store, but still, basically every week, getting another going out top. I have never worn so many tube tops in my life or handkerchief tops. Wouldn't do it anymore. I mean, you're in New York, you want to go out with your friends. So I feel like it's a part of life. And is it the best money decision? No. But if you right the ship and you don't go too far into debt and you pull out of it as soon as you can, then ultimately either no harm done or very little harm done. And you have a lot of memories.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm reading Die With Zero right now for book club that's actually tomorrow. I did not finish the book. Anybody who's in book club and is like, oh, yeah, I remember when you didn't finish the book. This is coming out in February, so nobody's going to remember a book club from September. But he had a boss at one point where he had saved $1,000 when he was 22 or something, and his boss called him an idiot, which I was like, all right, that's a little much. But the point was, in your 20s, you shouldn't be focusing on saving money because your income is going to increase. That's the time to save the money. Your 20s are the time to have the experiences because you're only going to be in your 20s once. You're only going to be this healthy. I don't know how I did this, but sometimes in college, I would go partying the night before and then I would wake up and have an 8 a.m. class the next day. I don't know how I did it. We would study in bars. I don't know how I did that, but I did. And I made pretty decent grades too, actually. Could not do that now at 38. Absolutely not. No way. I look at a beer and I get tired. Anyway, my point is I don't actually regret going into that debt. I will say I regret the clothes part of it because who needs all those clothes? I barely wore any of those. But the experiences I paid for, even the ones that were just going out and drinking or going out to some new fangled place, like when you're in Manhattan or Brooklyn or wherever, it's an experience in and of itself to live in that city, right? So I don't actually regret doing that, even though it got up to $5,000. And for me, that was a lot of money. I think my average over the whole time I lived in New York City, I was making $25,000 a year. So that's what, a fifth of my yearly salary.
So I think three things. One, don't worry that you haven't finished the book because it's a book that could be a blog post. Look at your buckets of time, figure out what you can do then and not later. And then do those things then because you won't be able to do them later. You got it. You're good on the book. He's a energy commodities trader and has tens of millions of dollars. His level of risk is so much lower, so he can be pretty cavalier in the way he states things. And also, you state things in a cavalier way because it sells. It's sexy. It sells. Two, I think I remember that story about his boss. And here's the thing, it's not either or, because there's also the other side of you start saving early and that time in the market for the money is so powerful. So I think having some balance early on is good.
Don't just go wild. Yeah, we're not saying go wild, y'all. Because I was like, what about emergency fund? If he got hit by a cab and the cab drives off and he has to go in the hospital, how's he going to pay for that? I know $1,000 isn't going to cover that, but you have to think a little bit more strategically than no savings.
And third, don't feel bad about your $5,000. I was in New York before you, and I think I left law school with $20,000 credit card debt. It was a lot. You kept it in check and you made it out and you paid it off. So
I did. Yes. Yeah, it was funny because that was actually what got me into personal finance, was trying to figure out how to pay this credit card debt off, because I was like, wow, look at all this interest I'm paying. This sucks. So let's figure that out. So yeah, people who've listened to the show know that story, so I won't go into that. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a quick rating. Also, hit up my Patreon at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast for ad-free and bonus content. I'm Megan Combs, and I'll see you next time on Everyday Fi.